Let's talk about World War One. First, we need to talk about the fact that this YouTube channel exists. I used to have a YouTube channel. Um, Actually, I think it might still be active. iMoon Video. I used to do like parodies of popular movies and shows and stuff like that. Then after that, my friend and I had a YouTube channel where we read and critiqued our old writing from like middle school and high school. It was supposed to be a podcast, but we never got it hosted on any sites or anything, so it's just on YouTube. That channel is called Garbage Shrimp, and the podcast was called Retrospection Section. We're actually trying to get it, rebooted again, but it's not up yet. So if you want to listen to us read my writing from 6th grade, it's there for you to witness, unfortunately. Anyway, now that that's out of the way, I'm going to give you an intro to the channel and kind of explain what I'm trying to do here. I consider myself like a horrible gene splice between a historian, a public historian, and a social scientist. I have feelings about each of the fields. I majored in social science with a history focus in college, and I'm halfway through my master's in history. But I also have worked in archives and museums, so I have that kind of angle to look at things. To get it right out of the way, if big pauses and stammering and interrupting oneself and going back to the beginning of the sentence to revise what I was saying and starting out with one type of sentence, getting carried away, and then not finishing the first part of the sentence, that bothers you, you're gonna have a rough time. I have a fluency disorder called cluttered speech, common in a lot of autistic and ADHD people. You're just gonna have to bear with me. I'm gonna edit it out as much as I possibly can, because I want the video to be accessible and interesting to as many people as possible, but it is a thing that I really have no control over. I try really hard to organize my thoughts before I start to speak, and it doesn't always work. Getting back to what I originally wanted to do 5 minutes ago when I said I was going to do it, a rundown of this channel. It's going to focus mainly on World War One, sometimes on the period beforehand, so like Victorian, Edwardian era, and afterwards, so the interwar period. Specifically in the UK, the British Commonwealth, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, a little bit of South Africa, and a little bit of America. A chunk of America. That's my focus. I have basic knowledge of other belligerents and not belligerents, neutral parties during World War One, but my main focus is the British Commonwealth, and then its cohorts. But the reason that I got into this field were words sometimes a little f***ers. I want to have this channel have a element of humor because, for one, I have a hard time finding super dry, stoic, distant historians. I have trouble paying attention, basically. And I know that's probably the same for a lot of people when they watch really dry documentaries. And also because I am in favor of like an empathetic form of historical study, because I think I said this in a TikTok. My view is that any historian who says that you can be 100% objective about anything is fooling themselves. You always are influenced by your experiences and society's input on a subject, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing as long as you're aware of it and you're practicing um, critical thinking, which isn't necessarily popular either these days. But the record books that I study, the autograph books that I study from World War One, are very emotional, and I have been studying them for like 8 years, and I have also gotten a little bit attached to them. If you hear me saying my dudes or my guys, uh, my boys, I am referring to the soldiers who wrote in the record books. But back to the record books. A good chunk of this channel will be dedicated to going page by page, entry by entry through the autograph books that are in my possession. I will tell you how they got to be in my possession and what I've been doing with them for the past 8 years. but we're going to be reading entries, and then I will provide a little bio of the person who wrote the entry, as well as relevant social context and socioeconomic information and what that means for what might have influenced the entry. I have a little bit of beef with psychohistories, which are studies of historical documents and events through the lens of psychology. It really pertains to my research because a big chunk of my research is dedicated to shell shock and PTSD and how that manifested in soldiers of the First World War. So I do have to read a lot of that kind of material when I'm researching and when I'm working on my book. I'm writing a book about the record books, so you'll probably hear me talk about that very frequently. Psychohistories sometimes tend to devolve into self serving and like a self fulfilling prophecy. The Secret Battle by Michael Roper. It deals with emotional survival in the Great War. It's fascinating. It talks about the significance of letters and like bonds between families as well as the bonds between soldiers and how that played into survival mentally and physically throughout the war. However, it is a psychohistory and it's very Freudian. For an example, a very important thing to keep in mind when you're studying World War One primary documents, so like journals, newspapers, letters, etc. The societal influence of manliness and sportsmanship in the UK and Britain and England specifically did not allow for men to express their feelings, especially towards women. My record books were owned by a nurse, so a woman at the time. They were known as sisters, like nuns, in the UK. In America, I think they probably just called them nurses because they were associated with the Red Cross. My nurse was associated with the Red Cross, but was not in the Red Cross. So a little bit weird. Anyway, if you hear me say Sister Lance, that's the nurse that owned the record books that I'm studying. Anyway, Roper notes that a soldier's mental and emotional state was often couched in oblique clues, which require a historian to read between the lines and employ a degree of psychoanalysis. That is true. A lot of the men would say things like, I've never had so much fun in my life. Uh, Living outdoors is so manly. And they would tone down their obvious trauma. Like, we see the trauma in diaries where they didn't think anybody else was going to read them, but in letters, we will see things like, all we do is sit around and play football. And yeah, it's raining a little bit, but it's fine. Like, that does happen. You encounter that a lot where it's like, how could they be saying this about this horrifying conflict where like their friend just died like 5 minutes ago and now they're writing to their family that like, oh yeah, it's we're all just chilling, we're all just like eating outside and making potatoes, la la la. So that discrepancy has an explanation in the Victorian mindset of men aren't allowed to express feelings or have any kind of hysterical quote unquote reaction to even the worst things. It was all about manliness, controlling your emotions, being stoic. However, Michael Roper does exemplify this phenomenon of Freudian psychoanalysis with regards to the conflict and the documents that came out of the conflict. He saw a lot of coincidences and symbolism that feel more like metaphysical and revisionist than historical. All right, here's a passage from The Secret Battle. 17-year-old subaltern, so like a minor officer, Wilbert Spencer wrote, just after coming out of the trenches, hinted at a grueling time. In his first dose, so quote, in his first dose of shrapnel and shell, unquote, he had seen one of his men killed and another 4 wounded, a shell having, quote, first, crossed out, burst right on our trench, end quote. Spencer's automatic repetition of the word first intimated how much this violent introduction to modern warfare had upset him. Further down the page, he returned to the incident, explaining that, quote, one of the worst sights, crossed out, parts of war is the sights one has to endure, end quote. The word sights is crossed out and parts added instead. It was the sights that filled his mind, the memory of them running ahead of his ability to put them into words. And then I put my note. I see the reasoning and the impulse to explain it this way. As Roper says, historians of World War I public history often have to read between the lines and employ a multitude of theories and fields to gain a full picture. However, this example feels almost too granular and based too much on conjecture to convince me of Roper's interpretation with any confidence. It does, however, bring to mind the psychological quirk of a person's handwriting changing after experiencing, uh, during and after experiencing a trauma. So if you're in, I don't remember what the field of study is called, where you study handwriting and you say like, oh, the little barb on the end of the C indicates that you're a narcissist or whatever. I'm gonna be researching that too because I have seen a lot of the servicemen's handwriting change compare in the record books compared to on their enlistment paperwork. Like their enlistment paperwork was often very neat and textbook perfect cursive, and then in the record books when they were making their entry after getting to the hospital that they were at, um, changed drastically. So there is that. However, he ascribes these extremely broad assumptions um, of what was going through a man's brain while he was writing based on like the tiniest little pieces of evidence. And maybe he knows more than I do, but that seemed like a weak argument. He does make other very strong arguments about this, but psychohistories tend to extrapolate a little too heavily. That's not to say that it's false because, like I said, empathy is a really important like skill to be able to apply with public history. But when there's too much, they're picking and choosing from facts to like try and prove their point. That's just something you have to look out for. Because I am emotionally attached to my autograph books in my field of study. We need to be able to call ourselves out when we start to devolve into that kind of like taking facts to fit theories instead of theories to fit facts. Damn, I just devolved into that whole little historiographical tangent, didn't I? Anyway, my mouth is so dry now because I've been talking for 20 minutes straight. Yes, this is a Ray Dunn mug. Don't come for me. I got it at a thrift store because it says potion, and I love that video. That's the guy saying, "Potion seller, I'm going into battle, and I require only your strongest potion." I don't go to Home Goods and buy Ray Dunn mugs. I buy them at thrift shops because I don't like live, laugh, loving. So that kind of covers that. I also had an epiphany the other night. I was like, I could get nicer microphones than this and do ASMR videos where I'm going through the autograph books and reading things. Obviously, these microphones are not it, but if I get my other nicer microphone from my parents' house. I think I left it there in a box when I was moving. If that's something you are interested in, I would love to try making an ASMR video with historical research and knowledge going on in the background. Can't really think of anything else specifically. So we're going to jump into the other type of video that I was mentioning where I go entry by entry of the record books and tell you about the guys and their lives. I want to share that because it's a primary source that is pretty much right now known only to me. And there's some amazing things in there. There is an account of the 1914 Christmas truce with some very interesting discrepancies between the writing and what actually happened and the guy who was in the hospital, because on the facing page there's an entry in the same handwriting but from a different guy, which means that either the guy who wrote the 1914 Christmas Truth entry wrote for his buddy or vice versa because he had an injured arm, or he was just kind of repeating all the stuff that he had heard about the Christmas truce and like pretending that he was there. It's also interesting because I couldn't find this soldier. I could basically find like, oh yeah, he was in the army, but I found almost no documents about him. So part of me feels like it was just a guy making up another guy and making up the things that he saw and writing them in the autograph book because he wanted to be cool. So that's the type of historical sleuthing that I love to do. Once I found, and one of the entries had was just a name and the service number and his battalion and the force that he was in. He was Australian, and through that I was able to find a gay love story, a cover up of this soldier, Charles Crichton Edwards, and his older lover. I like to think they were lovers. There's a possibility that it was just some guy. But yeah, that was fascinating. That's one of my favorite bits of research I've ever been able to do. I will tell you about how I found the resources that I used to confirm who these soldiers were, and if I was able to find pictures of them or newspaper clippings, if I found their descendants. I'm going to tell you about how I found the owner of the autograph books using only her signature, and the place where the record books had been bought at an estate sale. Because that was really fun to find out. I started crying in the archives because I was like, I thought I never was going to find her, because I only had her name, but I found her and I was so excited. She was super cool, apparently. We're going to be jumping into that type of video next. So I guess if you have autoplay on, that's probably the next one you will see for now, because that will be one of two videos, that one and this one, on the channel by then, probably. But you can check out my shorts. I'm going to have shorts, YouTube shorts. Check out my shorts. What a phrase. I will be doing YouTube shorts. And I also have a TikTok account with the same name, Forget Me Not History. Oh, I should probably explain the significance behind the name of this channel. Forget-me-nots were a very popular flower in the Victorian, Edwardian, and World War One era. And after too, I guess. Because everybody had autograph books, and when they were making friends, they'd be like, forget me not, and they'd draw a little forget me not. They were in poems, all sorts of different poems. The references in the autograph books to forget me not are just ubiquitous. So that felt apt, and also because I really ascribe to the view that if you forget history, if you don't learn from history, you're going to repeat it. To be very straightforward, our society really sucks at that. So it's kind of a play on words, but kind of just an homage to a flower that was really important to the people that I'm studying. Anyway, give me a like and subscribe, and hit the little bell to get notified whenever I post a new video. It might be a little bit sporadic because I do have ADHD and I will hyperfixate on things and sometimes release like 3 different videos a day, and then go 3 weeks without posting anything. So if that's just gonna warn you now that that's probably what's gonna happen. And yeah, like and subscribe.